let's get started right away. We can break down the story elements. Let's learn. See, I can start it off, but then it's your turn. Tricky long words, we can do it, no problem. Wanna learn the definition? Yeah, we can solve it. We gon' have fun, cause reading is the best. So tune in if you're ready for a bookcast. Yeah.
Hello, awesome readers. Welcome to Bookcast. I am your host, Elizabeth Langs, and I'm so excited that you're back for Chapter 2 of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Before we get started, I have a couple quick announcements. So first of all, thank you so much to those of you who use the hashtag Bookcast. I loved seeing your drawings and your illustrations, and I shared one on my social media from Michael. So thanks, Michael, for sharing your awesome illustration of Ichabod Crane. I absolutely loved it. Secondly, if you haven't checked out Tori's resource from Teachers Pay Teachers, I would encourage you to do so. It's a great way to extend the conversation with your child. With the podcast, I'm introducing a lot of content, but I'm not able to cover everything within the book. So that's a great way for you to continue that conversation with your child. And the task cards are high quality and have a lot of really useful information. So I'm going to link those again in my posting about episode 2. So you can check them out. And I really, really am so happy that she shared those with us. They're great. Also, don't forget, grab your journal. So if you don't have one with you, go ahead and go get it really quickly. And I'm going to have a couple questions at the end again that I would like for you to write about. So grab those. Before we start Chapter 2, we need to go back and review Chapter 1 and make sure that we remember what was covered in that chapter so that we can fully comprehend the story. So in Chapter 1, we learn that our story is taking place in a town called Sleepy Hollow, and the people that live in Sleepy Hollow are starting to share a legend. So like we said, a legend is an oral story that's passed on person to person. So the story, or the legend, is about the Headless Horseman. And Ichabod Crane starts to hear about this story also, and so we're going to see in Chapter 2 that hearing that story is starting to really enter his thoughts. So we also learn that Ichabod Crane is our main character in the text. And we learned in Chapter 1 that he is a teacher. And he doesn't really have a place to live, so he goes and he stays with the families of his students. And while he's there, he takes advantage of some great meals, but he also helps out with the family on their farms. So that's our main character in our story. And in Chapter 2, we're going to learn even more about him so that we can connect with him as a character and relate to him. We do have two vocab words in Chapter 2. The first one is lodged, and that just means they're talking about him staying with someone, that he lodged with them. The second one is whippoorwill. So in this chapter, Ichabod Crane is reading outside, and he is near they call it a gurgling brook, which is just like a little river that's making noise. It's gurgling. And then he also is hearing the sounds of whippoorwills. So whippoorwills are a type of bird. So those are our two vocab words for this chapter. Let's go ahead and get started with our reading. So grab your books and follow along. In addition to teaching school and helping out around the farms where he lodged, Ichabod Crane was the singing master of the neighborhood. He earned many bright coins by instructing young folks in the singing of hymns. On Sundays, he was very proud to take his place in front of everyone at church and lead his little group of chosen singers. I think, he would confide to his friends afterward, that our hymns this morning really outshone everything else about the service. Don't you agree? Certainly you could hear his voice above everyone else's. It carried half a mile to the other side of the mill pond. And they say that to this day, on a quiet Sunday morning, the faint notes of Ichabod Crane's high voice still echo in the air near the old church. An educated man, Ichabod was a gentleman with tastes and knowledge way beyond what the rough country men could brag of. He proved to be popular with all the girls and women of that rural neighborhood. Whenever he came to visit, they were likely to set out extra cakes and candies and to make use of their best silver teapots. Ichabod went out of his way to encourage the good opinion of the ladies. He would talk with them after church on Sundays. He would gather grapes for them from the wild vines that overran the surrounding trees. He would recite for their amusement all the sayings carved into the gravestones in the churchyard. "Here lies my wife, and let her lie," he read. "She is at peace, and so am I," and all the ladies would giggle. He would go walking with a whole group of them down by the mill pond, while the bashful country bumpkins hung back. These young men were shy as sheep, and envied Ichabod's elegance and easy way with the girls. So the other men are a little jealous of him that he's so easily able to entertain these ladies. The ladies thought Ichabod a man of great learning. He read to them from A History of New England Witchcraft. Witches and magic were subjects that he believed in most firmly himself. Wise and educated as he was, Ichabod still loved weird and unusual tales. Living in Sleepy Hollow whetted his appetite for legends of ghosts. The more wild and strange the story, the more likely he would swallow it. So they're saying the more wild the story, the more likely Ichabod is to actually believe it's true. Often after school, he would lie in the clover near the gurgling brook and read for hours about witches and goblins and ghosts. It would already be growing dark by the time he headed for home. Every sound of nature spooked his excited mind. The cooing of a whippoorwill from the hillside, the croak of a tree toad, the hooting of an owl, even the rustling of birds in a bush made Ichabod's hair stand on end. Fireflies scared him. A beetle might bump into him in the dark, and he would jump 10 feet, sure that he'd been touched by a witch. The only way he could make it home was to sing his hymns, which he thought would drive away evil spirits, or at least drown out the noises they made. "There goes Ichabod Crane," a farmer in Sleepy Hollow would say to his wife as they sat by their house at night. "I hear that scrawny schoolteacher's voice again." But however many fears and frights came over Ichabod, they were merely the terrors of his own mind. Though he'd seen many specters in the darkness and even been pursued by the devil in various shapes, daylight always put an end to these evils. His life was actually a safe and pleasant one. Until one day his path was crossed by a being who has caused more trouble for mortal man than all the ghosts, goblins, and witches put together. A woman. So that is the end of chapter 2. It's a pretty quick one, but like I said, I want to go back and take a peek at the internal conflict that Ichabod is experiencing in this chapter. So let's go back to page 26, and I will read it to you in case you have a different version than mine. So while he's outside and he's reading, he says, "Fireflies scared him." Fireflies are not scary. So he's taking a lot of time and he's reading about ghosts and goblins and witches. And that's kind of tricking his mind into believe some things that are not true. So he even said a beetle might jump into him in the dark and he would jump 10 feet, sure that he'd been touched by a witch. The only way he could make it home was to sing his hymns, which he thought would drive away evil spirits. So Ichabod is thinking all these things in his head, and he's having to combat those thoughts with his songs that are kind of putting him at peace. So there's a little bit of that struggle there in that part, but there's also some on page 28. So he said, "But however many fears and frights came over Ichabod, they were merely the terrors of his own mind. Though he'd seen many specters in the darkness and even been pursued by the devil in various shapes, daylight always put an end to these evils. His life was actually a safe and pleasant one." So there's another struggle there where he has a pleasant life, but his mind is being taken over by these terrors, the ghosts and the goblins that he's reading about and hearing about and thinking about. So that's the internal conflict that I was talking about. It's Ichabod struggling with these thoughts and having to deal with how to combat them, how to fight them. So we're going to see that more throughout the text. And this is our first example of that. And at the end, they are hinting at our next character. So it said, until one day his path was crossed by a being that has caused more trouble for mortal man than all the ghosts, goblins, and witches put together, a woman. So we're going to meet a new character in chapter 3. Her name is Miss Van Tassel, and we'll talk about her some more tomorrow. And so we have a new character that's joining us, which is really fun and exciting. And with that new character is going to come a different kind of conflict. So I have a couple questions for you. So grab your journal, and I would love for you to once again use the hashtag bookcast so that I can see the answers that you have. And if you wanted to draw a picture of what you think Miss Van Tassel looks like, or if you wanted to illustrate the front cover, like I said, I would love to see any sort of contribution you have to the book. And with that being said, here is our first question. What subject does Ichabod like to read about? And along with that question, here's the second part. What has increased his interest in this subject? So you're going to have to go back through the chapter and find that. That's another green question, which means you can go back and find it. The second question, what would happen to Ichabod when he would walk home at night after spending the afternoon reading? And how would he handle that? So once again, green question, go back to the text and find the answer. It would be awesome if you could cite your evidence. Those are the only two questions I have for this chapter. Like I said, it was a pretty short one. So chapter 3 will be tomorrow, and I hope you'll come back and join us. Use the hashtag bookcast. You can also find me on social media. It's just Elizabeth Lang, so you can find me on Facebook with that name. You can find me on Instagram with that name. And like I said, I've also created an Instagram for the podcast itself. So you can find it. It's just Bookcast Podcast. So take a peek at those, and I will attach another link to the task cards. So go ahead and take a peek at those. They're really, really awesome, and I'll share a couple photos of those so you can have a better idea of what they look like and what they offer. Thanks so much for joining us, and I will see you tomorrow for Chapter 3.
Bookcast, where you can read a chapter a day, learn some vocabulary. Let's get started right away. We can break down the story elements. Let's learn. See, I can start it off, but then it's your turn. Tricky long words, we can do it, no problem. Wanna learn the definition? Yeah, we can solve it. We gon' have fun, cause reading is the best. So tune in if you're ready for